Well, we're expecting the president to address the nation any minute from now, and we know that he will be clarifying on a number of measures that he mentioned yesterday. Today is the last day of the 14-day extension that was given on the 6th of May 2020. Now, one of the things that continues to be highlighted during this time of lockdown is a human rights violation. Joining us to take a look at that conversation and what laws have been violated in this time, and in particular one that we'll be getting into, is human rights lawyer Nicholas Opiyo, who is from the organization Chapter 4. Good evening and welcome to NTV.
Thank you for having me, Rita.
Well, Nicholas, I just want you to start by painting a picture of the human rights situation in Uganda under the ongoing lockdown.
Thank you for having me again. Like in the medical practice, where there's an overemphasis on COVID and COVID tracking, in the human rights space as well, there has been an overemphasis on implementing the guidelines issued by the president, the result of which has been that several other people who are victims of human rights violations, who have been incarcerated, have been left unattended to. If you go to any police station in the country now, there are several people who have been detained there for more than a month. 2 days ago, I was at Ginger Road Police Station. I rescued 2 individuals who have been there for more than 2.5 months without being produced in court. So there are several people who have been ignored. There are several other issues in the human rights space that have been ignored. On the social and economic front, the question of access to a decent living, to food, access to employment by so many people have been left ignored. It is as if they have been reduced to a secondary need, and yet these are primary needs of individuals. The country is conducting itself as though we're in a state of emergency, even though that has not been declared formally. The result of which is human rights violation, the disregard for the law, and the trampling on the rights of many people, especially the weak and the poor across this country.
Well, when you mention the fact that as a country it is not a state of emergency that has been declared, but primary needs are being ignored, taking it to things such as extension. Now, yesterday, the uproar following what the president did mention, which did seem, and we hope he will be clarifying when he comes on later, is that we'll be having a 14-day extension that is meant to ease us ease us out of this lockdown. What is your comment on that in regards to human rights?
First of all, I think that we are not making a scientific decision in this latest extension. The president commissioned a team of scientists who went across the country to do a surveillance and a quick study of whether there are any community infections. The scientists returned a preliminary hearing. The Minister of Health held a press conference and was very categorical that there is no evidence yet of community transmission of COVID. So it is difficult to imagine on what basis President Museveni extended the lockdown for another 14 days. This argument about the requirement for all of us having a government-supplied mask is one that defeats what we have been doing already anyway, because people have been ordered to wear masks. People are producing masks in many small shops and in the cottage industry. The argument that we're waiting for a government-supplied mask to lift the lockdown is one that flies in the face of what we've been doing over the last couple of months. But secondly, it just doesn't have a scientific basis. The question that needs to be asked is what happened to the report of the scientists that the president commissioned. That report, we now have been told, provided that there's no evidence as of now of community transmission of the disease. Why would a guy in Gulu be locked up because of a truck driver in Malaba? The predominant source of infection we now know are from truck drivers. Let's deal with that and allow people to resume their life while maintaining social distancing, while washing their hands and doing the other things that other countries are doing across the world.
And where would we put the law protecting us as individuals, citizens within Uganda, to say that, well, this is what's happening on the scientific end of things, but where does the law come in to protect each person within the country? Where would the law, if you can hear me, where would the law come in to protect an individual in a time like this? Do we seem to have lost you, Nicholas?
I think that we must. I can hear you.
Okay. You were saying?
I think that we must be cognizant of the plight of the largely poor Ugandans who have disproportionately suffered the impact of the guidelines and the impact of the pandemic. If we act in ways that are deaf-tone to the plight of the people who are facing the biggest brunt of this pandemic, we risk radicalizing, we risk angering people and raising the level of anger in the country. And that can turn into a protest, that can turn into a riot. You have seen in other countries, people are beginning to protest because they would rather die of COVID instead of dying of a lack of food in their houses. So we have to be cognizant of that. Secondly, we continue to make the case that the courts of law haven't been closed. Judges are going to court, magistrates are going to court. Why in a country in which a law is supposed to be governed by rule of law, why aren't lawyers being allowed to attend to their clients in court? This process of inhibiting the full functioning of the court can only lead to more human rights violation, can lead to the violation of the freedom of a fair trial by many people across the country.
Now, taking it to another thing you mentioned earlier is that you've been able to visit a number of police stations where some people have been held. And we take a look at a number of people who have been arrested in this time who have violated the curfew, which is from 7 p.m. to 6:30 a.m. What's your take on those people in those places at this point in time?
Look, a person like George Agaba, who has been detained at Ginger Road Police Station for well over 3 months on allegation that they were conspiring to rob a rich businessman, are people who don't deserve to be in a police cell right now. The country went into a process of decongesting prisons. What in fact has been done is the recongestion of prisons. We pardoned about 833 people and released them from prisons. That in itself was a drop in the ocean. But what we have done since then is to recongest the prison service with more inmates, making the effort to pardon people really a useless effort, or one that is pointless. So I think that what we need to do is to ask the courts to return to full function, allow lawyers to be able to go to court, apply for bail for people who have qualified for mandatory release on bail, allow people who are being detained at police stations to access legal services, to be able to obtain a police bond. People like Ivan Oluka, who spent 2.5 months at Ginger Road Police Station, was able to get a police bond because I intervened. People like Isaac Semakade, who were arrested by the police, were able to get police bonds because the president of the Law Society and myself and other lawyers intervened. Let's allow the people to access justice in its fullest sense. Maybe then we can address the problem of overcrowding and the large numbers that are being arrested. But we also must put a human face to the implementation of the guidelines. In Lira, for example, 49 women, many of them clutching onto their naked babies, were sent to prison for selling fruits on the streets. The DPC in Lira has been over-enthusiastic in implementing these guidelines and making poor women who are looking for food for their children suffer imprisonment. I think we must urge the authorities to have a human face to the implementation of these guidelines, where people need to be warned, need to be guided, need to be educated. Let's educate them, but not send them to prison. Imprisonment cannot be a solution for every problem we have. Let's have a human face to the implementation of the guidelines and in addressing this pandemic.
So besides the human face, any other thing that the government needs to do to be able to, one, fight the fight against COVID-19 in the right way, but also uphold all human rights for each and every individual within the country?
There are so many things that government has to do, and these are going to be long-term things that have to be done. You cannot fight a virus by hiding away from it. The virus is going to be here. And so we have to begin to strengthen our healthcare systems to be able to respond to these kind of emergencies. What this pandemic has done is to lay bare naked the inefficiencies in our healthcare systems. Doctors, nurses, healthcare workers have for a very long time through the Uganda Medical Association been asking for proper remuneration and supplies of equipment in hospitals. So we must build a healthcare system to be able to respond to a pandemic. But more importantly, we cannot treat this pandemic like a military problem. This is not a military war. This is a scientific problem. We must approach it scientifically. This whole argument about treating this as a war skews the problem and makes the problem appear as though it's a political problem. This is a basically scientific problem. We must adopt scientific means of addressing it, and this scientific means requires that we listen to scientists. How I wish that the scientists speak to us more than President Museveni addressing the nation, because they know better what to say. They provide scientific evidence. They provide clarity. President Museveni's address has most times been so unclear, caused so much confusion that has led to the arrest and violation of the rights of many people. Talk about the address last night. What did he say? Did he say that the instrument requiring us to wear masks and that we have been wearing masks was in fact in vain, and that we have to wait for a government-issued masks? That seems to me a very unscientific way of addressing the problem. So let's listen to the scientists. Let the scientists speak. Let the politicians take advice from scientists, not scientists taking advice from politicians. I would love to see President Museveni in the audience and listening to the Minister of Health, to the scientists that have put their lives on the line to save the lives of our people for all this while.
Okay. Lastly, before I let you go, you mentioned that we're going to see long-term effects. What could possibly be the long-term effects when it comes to the new normal regarding human rights within the country?
I lost you there, but I hope I got the gist of your question.
I could say it was... Let me just say it again.
Go ahead.
Is that what do you think might be the new normal in regards to human rights within the country after this?
You see, after September 11th, the tragic events of September 11th, world leaders went into a fear-mongering campaign that rolled back on the achievements and the respect for human rights for years. The right to privacy, the right to detention, the right to freedom to access a lawyer were all dashed away in the fear of addressing global terrorism. What I see happening is similar. The COVID situation has been the best gift to autocrats and world leaders who seek to exert their power and who are uncomfortable with the rule of law. I think that for a very long time, we are going to see massive violations of rights in the pretext of preventing a pandemic, in the pretext of maintaining public health. We have seen how vigilant LDUs have been in beating people who have not even violated the guidelines. How much more are we going to see when these LDUs become a part of our new normal? But more concerning for me is the continued involvement of the military in civilian life. The Ugandan police force has now been overrun by the military. That appears to be the new normal. We are now running TV PR exercises praising the response of the army in addressing a pandemic. I think that we need to reflect a little bit more on whether we need the army in every aspect of our civilian life. We are doing this at the expense of undermining traditional institutions of policing.
Thank you so much.